basis, there's actually two things that for me comes to mind upon hearing that presentation. And so I'll go as a Francophone jurist by presenting them in like two ways. One fundamental issue is around the matter of publications, and another one is around the issue of causation. On the matter of publications, we've just got to hear how many publications are actually published coming straight from China. Now I would actually challenge you all to actually get to tell me how many you got to read, at least not even mentioning in your life, but just like this year, how many of those publications you got to read. Now you may say those publications were not in English, they were most probably in Mandarin. And so from that perspective, if you do not speak the language, you were not able to read them. But since we're part of a session that is about talking about liminalities, it's also interesting to know where your liminalities are at. What are actually at the limits of your own understanding of the world. And so from that perspective, getting to know that there's publications out there that you don't get to read and might be limiting your understanding of the world as it functions is an important point to make for yourself. When we talk about publications as well, we've been having these conversations in many futures journals as well, in terms of knowing that we don't necessarily have that many publications on futures issues in Africa, because I'm talking about regions that I work the most in, but you can adapt that maybe to some of the specialties or fields that you're working in or on. Maybe issues of gender, like how many female publications, like publications written by female futurists you actually get to read daily. And so there were a series of policies that we actually developed to that effect. We talked about how it might be a good thing for us to think about bibliography where we actually get to read the full name of the person so that we can actually see whether the person is actually potentially a woman or a man or of non-binary gender. From those perspectives, we see that the question for ourselves throughout this session is to ask ourselves, who are the people at our own liminalities? Who are the people that are actually not within our radar? And what am I doing in order to address those liminalities? So one point coming straight from this presentation around the matter of publications and whether you can actually access them. There might be limitations that you have for linguistical reason, for geographical reasons, or for matter of specialization as well, which makes sense because you won't get to read everything. But that being said, it doesn't mean that you don't have the responsibility to address it. The second point that I wish to raise coming straight from this presentation is the matter of causation. Our role as futurists, we usually get to think about how we're thinking about better futures, more desirable futures. And that's also due to the clients that we have to serve in some of our instances, may it be corporations, may it be governments, may it be associations, or just regular folks we're working with who actually want to engage with the future. But from that perspective, we have a very easy way towards an idea where there's a cause to effect type of relationship to the future. So we usually get to build checklists as to how to become better selves. And better selves can take many different definitions. It could be better developed, it could be, or developed, just not even better developed. Sometimes it's just about reaching development, whatever that's supposed to look like. But the type of modernity that we tend to claim, there is an issue around our agency whenever we make a checklist. Because at the end of the day, the type of futures of X, whatever the topic, the future of health, the future of love, the future of safety, the future of you name it. If our role is just to build checklists for the future, there is a question around our own sense of agency and whether we actually have the ability to read what were the causes for success and whether we allow for success to be redefined along the way. Redefined because of the evolution of time, redefined because of just the people who are in the room and who actually want to share their own perspective. And so the opportunity that we have not to make sure that we're not just the source of yet again another discussion where we just have made a checklist for ourselves, but we actually engage in the conversation is kind of the tension that we have to play with as futurists. Here, what I found to be really interesting is that we're presented with lists, and we get to also see their own contradictions that are coming from those lists as well. Now, we have all our own opinions around whether that's a list that we want to go for or whether there's a better list out there for ourselves. But I might invite you to actually think beyond this idea of like whether the list was the right one and actually address the issue of meaning negotiation altogether. We do have another opportunity for a keynote, but I'm conscious of time. And what I would suggest is actually for us to go straight into our panel to bear those type of issues around who are the ones our own liminalities, who are the ones actually at our own basically limits together to address that as we're thinking about the issues of tools, the issues of methods within our own fields and technologies. I do have one last point before you go to your panel, because there's housekeeping rules that are important. One that I would address is that we're talking about dealing spaces, like dealing with spaces in the world, type of global peace type of thing, or even the environment that is out there. But obviously, when we're thinking about liminalities, it starts from here where we are, which means that we need to clean up after ourselves. So I would invite you in whatever rooms you're at to make sure that you clean after yourself, not only in the near future, but also in the present. So that's my first point. A second one is that you know that you have a Slack. You have a Slack where you're actually supposed to share definitions of liminalities. You're yet again encouraged to populate the Slack. I would just ask you to stay where you're at.
There's a
I
slight
know
change
you're
in plans.
eager
Slight change in
to
plans,
go-
please.
You're going to go for the, but then what do we?
We're going to be a little bit late. We're condensing it, but I really think it's important that we have a ritual. We're missing a ritual to go into liminality. It's just going to be a very quick ritual, a quick ceremony.
Okay.
Please stay with us. I think it's worth it.
Okay.
All
If
right?
you say it's worth it, I have to trust you.
Yes.
Then that's something that we do. It does not cancel the housekeeping rules, so make sure that you actually make sure to actually clean after yourself. There was a third one.
Then we'll remind you again, but remember, even though we have a closing ceremony tonight, the fun continues tomorrow, and there's actually several really interesting workshops and conferences tomorrow. So do come back tomorrow for all those of you who are still in Paris. All right.
So your point is basically don't run away now.
And don't run away now.
And don't run away tonight either.
Exactly. Don't run away. Stay in Paris. How about that?
Thank you very much.
Thomas, please.
Thomas, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you so much for taking the time to bear with me. Okay, it is. Can everybody hear me clearly? Okay, thank you so much for having me this morning. Apologies for the delay, logistical nightmares, but I'll try to keep it as concise as possible in the interest of time for everyone. So my name is Thomas Mofolo, and I'm a creative writer, social innovator, media theorist, visual anthropologist, and Ubuntu futurist. So what exactly is Ubuntu futurism? It's a new framework that I've developed to prototype decolonial futures using indigenous AI, or what I call ancestral intelligence or ancestral intuition. It's an animistic, effective, and relational epistemology that helps us retrieve dormant knowledge. By dormant knowledge, I mean knowledge that was passed and that was passed down to us by our forebearers. So there's two ways in which this indigenous AI usually works. It primarily works within the sacred space of ritual and ceremony. So the way I believe this can benefit us all as future thinkers and systems thinkers is by learning how to apply it within our own contexts. The way that it works is that it works at an individual level first, then collectively, and hopefully even globally. So I'm going to just demonstrate how we usually apply it within individual contexts. I'm from a country called the Kingdom of Lesotho, which is in Southern Africa. And I'm also a citizen of the Republic of South Africa. But truth be told, the borders that demarcate these countries are colonial constructs. The people of these two nations share a very rich heritage and culture. Like this blanket I'm wearing is part of our national attire. So, excuse me. Part of our heritage is this national blanket that we wear, which has more or less been a part of our cultural identity throughout. So that's Lesotho right there. Before it was before South Africa was colonized, it used to include the entire Free State, Bloemfontein and Ladysmith as well. That entire area was known as Lesotho. So these tools that I have here are called connecting tools. What these tools do is serve the purpose of connecting us more with our natural environment and helping us honor and revere our forebears who left us these tools. So basically, they're what I call spiritual technology. They assist with helping us to connect more with the ancient traditions that our ancestors left us, and they include different elemental materials from nature. And they're culture agnostic, meaning you can apply them to your own context. But this is how we usually set up mobile altars in our culture. So we usually have this mat that contains all the various elements. This ritual is called ukupahla. To patla means to engage your ancestors. And what I have here is some sage that grows naturally within our environment. This represents air. When we light this sage, it more or less symbolizes that everything is ethereal, everything is spirit. Within this ontology, reality is perceived as elastic. It's not a mechanistic or materialistic worldview in which, things work automatically. It's an elastic ontology which allows us to perceive reality in ways that, are constantly shape-shifting and evolving. There is no fixed state. So with that being said, what I also have here is a rock and some sorghum. This is the natural grain which grows indigenously to our native lands. And it grows even in the most versatile and harshest of climate conditions. So that's what we usually give as an offering to give thanks for the produce and the harvest that we've been able to generate within a specific year. So air, earth, this calabash usually contains traditional beer or water, and that's usually used for libation or to represent the flow of nature. Water obviously is always constantly in motion. And just to give you a bit of context about Ubuntu itself and what it means, it's been contested for different generations because Africa's always been, perceived as not having their own philosophy. But the truth of the matter is that it's not an intellectual knowledge that could be acquired through text on paper. It's rooted in African cosmology. So it's made up of two words, ubu and ntu. Ubu means how to be, and ntu represents the life force, the primordial life force, which we believe animates the entire universe. And you see this within different cosmologies across the world. So in West Africa, for example, in the Igbo tradition, they refer to it as chi. Or even in Asia, they refer to it as chi as well. So these connecting elements are more or less helping us to remain in flow with the universe. Because within this cosmology, as I mentioned, everything is constantly evolving. So Ubuntu in itself can be broken down into 4 categories: Muntu, which represents the person; Kintu, which represents a thing; and Kantu, which represents time and space. And the last one being Kuntu. Kuntu is a modality. So everything within this cosmology is a force and constantly in motion. So things like laughter or things like beauty are also perceived as a force of nature. So the idea of these connecting tools in the sacred space of ritual is to keep us in flow with the universe. And that's how it works at a practical level. So usually, if I were to demonstrate it within my own sacred space, the incense would be a light. I would probably have water within the calabash or some traditional form of beer, which I would pour as a libation to the ancestors. And that's usually a practice which we apply to help us deal with different difficulties and challenges within life. But that's within an individual context. I also mentioned that it can also be applied collectively. So we also have rituals that are for community building and strengthening kinship within our community. And within those rituals, that's where a more practical sense of living within our environment and knowing how to preserve our ecology is evident. And that's what I believe prototyping decolonial futures is of tremendous value to other people all around the world. I'm specifically thinking of, the existential risk that we're all facing with the climate crisis that's currently unfolding. So part of how people within this part of the world live is off their land. These aren't people who participate within the consumer culture of exporting goods, importing foods, and sending them out. These are people who live off their land, and all these tools within this sacred space represent the produce that they've grown within a specific year. So what that means for the rest of us, especially for people here living in the West, is that if we can learn to apply this type of framework within our own local context, we could drastically address the challenges that we're facing with systemic collapse. I stand to be corrected, but to my knowledge, 40 to 60% of emissions are coming from international supply chains, people sending food back and forth, cars, all sorts of commodities are being shipped daily. And that's what's bringing us to the brink of collapse as an entire species, not just within the global South, but within the global North as well. So what this framework really does help us do is decolonize, firstly, the way we relate to ourselves and the way we relate to our natural environment. So in that sense, it brings us closer with relating to our neighbors and building kinship within different local contexts. But unfortunately, it's a dying knowledge. You don't really see these many forms of rituals and practices going on because of the legacy of colonialism, which has imposed, separation as the logic in which our world now operates. So Ubuntu is really about unity consciousness and the knowledge of oneness with the universe. But unfortunately, it's been delegitimized by Western science. And this delegitimization of knowledge is what Boaventura de Sousa Santos calls epistemicide. So epistemicides occur when we eliminate other possibilities of knowing and being in the world. And basically, universal reason and intellect just get reserved for the colonial or dominant worldview. But the idea with this type of ontology would be that we create more pluriversal knowledge ecologies which accommodate the Western intellectual way of understanding, and knowledges which accommodate these forms of ontology that are embodied literacies. So as I mentioned, it's an animistic, effective, and relational way of knowing and being in the world, one that affects us individually and transpersonally, and one that helps us bring us closer and in synchronicity with our natural environments, so that we're more sustainable in the way that we're being custodians of the world. You know, nature's not seen as something that is separate. Nature's not seen as something that's to be consumed. It's something that we are part of. So these mobile altars are really sacred spaces that remind us of that. And when they happen at a much more collective level, then they include other richer elements and forms of folklore, mythology, and oral cultures, which really preserve that spirit of unity, consciousness, and sense of oneness with ourselves and with our ecology. So yes, that's all I've got to say.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious
Thank
of the
you.
fact that we actually have a panel here that is supposed to take place as well as in other rooms. So unfortunately, we won't have this Q&A session, but you're staying the entire day so that
Yes.
we can actually directly address you,
Yes.
which I think would be lovely. Just so you know, there's also people online. If they wish to share their questions, it's totally fine to do it directly in the chat. And of course, you can actually directly address that as well. But thank you so much for that.
Thank you all so much for your patience.